Morning, everyone. Welcome to the webinar today. We will be kicking off in a moment. And welcome to Greener Infrastructure Week, Day 3. So my name is Polly Goulet-Phillip. I'm the Senior Manager of Strategy and Policy Advisory here at Ecologic. I'll be introducing the session today and then passing over to our panel and presenters for a really exciting discussion. So just before we get started, I'd like to do an acknowledgement for traditional owners. So I think, there's a huge amount that we have to learn from the traditional owners who've got 60,000 plus years of experience looking after country. I'm calling in today on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I think one of the things I always like to talk to is the Wurundjeri seasons. So in November, we are now in the Burath Guru, or the grass flowering season. The days are getting longer, it's warming up, although looking out the window, it's quite grey today. But there's lots of sort of crazy bursts of wet and stormy weather, a lot of pollen for anyone like myself who suffers from hay fever. And also, the grasses are starting to flower. So for anyone like myself who's a dog owner, checking paws for grass seeds and the likes. But yes, I'd like to pay my respects to any traditional owners who are calling in or listening, elders past and present. Okay, so the session today, we will be talking about contract incentives to drive sustainable outcomes. We have a really exciting group of people on the panel. So we'll have Danielle Koetting from Suburban Rail Loop, Rob Harper from the North East Link project. Look forward to the session today.
All right, we're moving. So the North East Link project is, as it says at the top there, fixing the missing link between our cities north and east. This is a massive project. It is the single largest project addressing Victoria's roads and collectively represents about $26 billion of work stretched across 5 packages of works. Those packages are the central package, which is the main tunneling package of works, north and south, which are the freeway interchanges at the north with M80 and at the south with the Eastern Freeway. And then east and west are the upgrades to the Eastern Freeway itself. This project kicked off in earnest with contract signing at the end of 2021 for the central package of works. And for anyone that moves around the inner east of Victoria, the inner east of Melbourne, I should say, this is now a very, very visible project. It's been around in some form or another since the 70s, really. And that missing link is not over egging the pudding, I don't think, because if you look at the original intentions for how freeways were meant to operate in Melbourne, it was meant to basically connect all parts of the city as enthusiasm for freeway construction and the money and the oil crisis started to become an issue in the 70s. This is a section that was never built. It was addressed in part by the ill-fated East-West link, which I'm sure many people on the call can remember and possibly worked on, and is back with us now. So as it says on screen, 15,000 trucks off local roads every day, 135,000 car trips a day. It's going to significantly cut times for people moving from the southeast to the north. And of course involves 50 MCGs of open space, with the MCG naturally being a unit of measurement which we love in the public service. 10,000 new jobs for Victorians. As of last month, we were directly employing 13,000 people on the design, development and construction of the North East Link. So our sustainability commitments have been front and center since the very beginning of this project. We had a sustainability policy signed off originally in 2018 and then revised and updated in 2020. So a long time before we had really addressed these in a contractual kind of sense. The sustainability policy then fed into the objectives and targets. The objectives and targets are very public, and I encourage anyone who's interested to access those on the Big Build website. We also have an annual report which tracks how we're progressing towards those targets. We also have an EES from which EPRs are derived, much like SRL. And we also have an urban design strategy, which we also have to adhere to and which has sustainability requirements, which feed into the broader project objectives. So sustainability management is also central. The sustainability and climate change EPRs can be found in the sustainability policy, the objectives and targets, and also in the NELP sustainability management framework. So this is something which is very much baked into the cake and is addressed at many different levels across the hierarchy of the organization, in terms of management and decision making, but also addressed in the many different roles and requirements that are necessary to deliver a project of this scale. So it's not something which just exists in its own silo, which is specifically for the sustainability team or specifically for the sustainability teams of our contractors to address. This is hammered into everyone that this is an inherent part of the project which we have to deliver, and so it's everyone's business. Our sustainability objectives and targets are categorized into 6 overall themes, and we have 47 specific targets which we need to hit across the project. They fall into the categories of leadership, resource efficiency, urban ecosystems, communities, economic opportunities, and climate change. We came up with these objectives and targets through an extensive process with consultants, stakeholders of all different sorts, from local councils, local community members, local businesses, and also through consultation with government about likely changes to legislation and what specific legal requirements are actually going to be implemented by the time we're actually dealing with contracts that need to be signed. The objectives and targets, where possible, are tied back to the IS version 2.1 rating tool. So that seems to be a pretty good umpire and a pretty rigorous measurement tool to see how we're progressing against these things. We're one of the first projects to be signed up to version 2.1. Each of our packages will have to get a 2.1 rating. So we have a program-wide rating with a target of 50 points, but then we have early works, the central package, north, south, east, and west, who have their own individual package ratings that is then going to contribute to the program rating overall. So everybody has to pull their weight. In terms of how we set these requirements for our contractors, we take a minimum targets approach. So basically, we work out what our sustainability targets and objectives are. We work out what the industry best practice is. And then we basically embark in a series of negotiations to work out, okay, if we are starting at this point in 2020 or 2021, what is going to be industry, what are the industry requirements, and what is going to be a requirement and an acceptable outcome by the time this project is actually finished and traffic is running through it in 2028. So we looked at a whole series of projects overall to work out, if we take our minimum targets, what is the current industry best practice? And then from that worked out exactly where is industry going across all of these separate requirements. I won't go into this in too much depth, but a typical example is a 30% Portland cement reduction as a minimum kind of requirement. But then once we start thrashing that out and looking at what is industry best practice, we can see that Bayswater line upgrade achieved a 40% reduction in cement. So we take that to our delivery partners and we use that to start to thrash out some more specific requirements. And then that is a process which was explored and developed throughout all of our 47 targets across the project. So a great deal of this comes down to defining the sustainability targets, identifying the initiative's feasibility, and then quantifying that contribution of these initiatives towards these project-wide aspirations, which then gives us a neat and concise document, or a series of documents in terms of the TOC, the design solution, the UDLP, the management plans, and finalized targets. But for the purposes of today, we really need to address, how is it in that TOC phase that we actually get the stuff on paper that we actually need to see, that we want our contractors to deliver, and that we can actually use to motivate our contractors to go above and beyond. So we don't have KRAs or financial incentives bound to KPIs on the Northeast Link project, certainly not when it comes to sustainability. There's been a lot of discussion internally on this topic after it was originally raised by Ecologic. And I guess the reason we don't have these incentives, at least the facetious answer at least, is that we don't have to. But it's more complex than that, obviously, because there are other incentives that are sort of inherent to a project such as this. First and foremost is that sustainability is inherent to the social license required to deliver a project of this scope and scale. So I often joke that this is sort of equivalent to building the pyramids in Melbourne's inner east, and anyone who has been along Greensboro Road, the Eastern Freeway, or that section of the M80 would appreciate what I'm saying. It looks like every piece of major plant and equipment is available, that is available in Australia, is on site out there at the moment. We've got 2 TBMs that are plowing away under the surface. It's employing 13,000 people, which is a massive impact on the supply of labor to other projects across Victoria. Beyond that, it's creating a huge amount of disruption for the local community out there. And of course, anyone who listens to 3AW would know that the cost of this project is also a massive issue. So if we're causing this level of disruption across the project footprint and to the community in general, we need to be able to demonstrate that we are in the living embodiment of best practice as far as sustainability is concerned, because sustainability is front and foremost for many of those stakeholders that we deal with on a regular basis. Following that is we need to think about beginning with the end in mind, because this I think originally ideas started being bandied around for this project in 2016, and we know that the start date is going to be in 2028. The opening date is in 2028. So we need to think about what sort of sustainability initiatives are kind of nice to have or interesting, or what represents business as usual at that actual kickoff point, to in turn get to that point where we have to understand what is acceptable to the general public by the time we actually open. Because things that sound like borderline sci-fi technology when contracts are signed in 2023 and 2021 may not be taken seriously at all, or could be, be way beyond business as usual at the time the project actually opens. Sustainability is also no longer a nice to have. It's an inherent part of projects, in the same way that you would expect projects to have rigorous legal structures to make sure that they're operating within the parameters that they are legally required to. And it's not something is like a separate line item. It is just an inherent part of the project, in the same way that you wouldn't expect a project like this to be delivered and it's not structurally sound, or it comes without lines painted on the road. Sustainability is just another facet and another part of delivering a program of work like this. Sustainability staff are also, in our experience, and I'm sure for many others on the call, incredibly values-driven staff. So they are working away within these organizations to keep pushing and pushing and pushing regardless. In our daily contact with representatives of these delivery partners, they're constantly coming to us with things that they're excited about, new innovations, exciting things that they've heard about, things that they want to trial on the project. And this is not something which we've had to lock into contracts. This is just the way these people operate. These are some motivated people. When it comes to contracts, we don't make the requirements too prescriptive. We keep them as broad as possible because there are many stakeholders in terms of alliance partners and companies involved in these delivery partners that have their own ideological perspective on where technology is going or what sustainability requirements need to be prioritized. So we can set a target, and it's not up to us to tell those partners how they're actually going to get there. And that allows them the scope to do what they believe is the best way to approach those targets in accordance with their own organization's priorities. Beyond that, there's also the adherence to legislation. So we don't need to lock legislative requirements into contracts because they have to be adhered to regardless. And likewise, something which is increasingly happening is there is a requirement for delivery partners to adhere to their own reporting requirements, some of which we've certainly experienced this recently, some of which go beyond the reporting requirements and sustainability requirements that we have in our contracts, and sometimes beyond some of the requirements involved in local legislation, which is an excellent thing because that means because of internal processes and requirements, they keep ramping it up, and that is something that is then brought onto the project. When it comes to subcontractors and suppliers, sustainability represents a competitive advantage. So sustainability requirements on projects are not something that are going to be wound back over the next few years. I think it's obvious to all that these are requirements that are only going to be ramped up further and further and further. And these contractors and suppliers in the industry generally needs to be able to demonstrate that they can play in that league to be able to have a competitive advantage or even just to remain competitive at all. Finally, just because we don't have these things locked into contracts doesn't mean that innovation doesn't happen. It happens for many of the reasons above, but also at a most basic level, we can ask for that as far as ISK innovation points credits are required, which has been very successful on the project to date. So whilst that may all sound kind of airy-fairy and it's much better to have these things locked in on paper, I'm sure that is very reassuring from a legal perspective. We know that it works, and it's certainly working to date. And I think an excellent example of this is particularly relevant to Ecologic has been the implementation of recycled first policy on the project. So the initiative is that we need to have a contractual requirement for recycled first on the project. And what we want to see from the state's perspective is the greatest percentage of recycled content overall. So we don't give them a specific number. We tell them this is the policy, and what we want is the best possible outcome as far as that quantity of material is concerned. In terms of implementation, it means that the contractor is then able to go to the market during the TOC phase and really feel these things out as far as costs, as far as quantities are concerned, working out what innovations are happening, what is the pipeline for these things, and where is the industry going over the lifespan of the project. At the end of the RFPF phase, that means they can come back to us with a target and say, look, we've done this research, here's your minimum requirement. This is the number that we've actually come up with. And then the implementation of that really kicks off with the signing of the contract. So the outcome of that is that all of the Northeast Link packages have all the ones that are signed to date have contractual recycled content percentages, which are big by volume. Spark, for example, are at 30%, which is a great outcome because their contract was signed before the recycle first policy was implemented, certainly on the project, but they know that they need to play ball, even though it's not on their list of contractual requirements. They're still doing everything they can and reporting and holding that line. Likewise, M80 have got 30 for the northern package of works, have got 35%, and then EBTA are at 45% recycled content on the target, which is great. The upshot of this is increased supplier awareness. So We have these requirements, they go talk to the market understands what the expectation is, and there's money to be made there. And so the market adapts to what the actual requirements are. In terms of the applicability to industry and what the upshot there is, this one simple requirement for recycled content on the project, well, simple requirement, has dramatically expanded the knowledge base within the industry of the understanding and opportunity of what these requirements are. That includes, just the technology pilot programs, supply lines, all these sorts of things that allow this to actually happen for real on site. We know the development of these requirements and these targets in a project of this scale irons out many processes and protocols, which in turn allows smaller projects to be able to capitalize on these things. And finally, Recycled First is a Victorian specific tool. There is excellent knowledge sharing between states, and we know that knowledge that we learn in this process and on this specific project is stuff that can be fed in to help people in other jurisdictions meet these requirements. This is just one area, Recycled First and recycled content specifically. This happens across all of our objectives and targets. That concludes my presentation for today. I will leave it there. Thank you, team.
Thanks so much, Rob. I'll just ask all of our panelists now to switch on their cameras as well and welcome you all. So Polly introduced your start, but we've got Liam, Sam, Zoran and Andrew here to share all of their industry insights with us. So to kick us off first, Andrew, if you could share some examples of strategies from your experience that have successfully driven innovation and prioritised sustainable outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Danielle. I think in terms of contract setups and those mechanisms, it's all about setting up the client sort of documentation and that early preparation. And I think then you sort of tailor the mechanisms to the contract style involved. So across the major infrastructure projects in Victoria, we've seen sort of a change over time from D&C to alliances, and now we're heading towards the ITC style contract for SRLA East. I think if we just sort of reflect on some of the different KRAs over the years, that preparation ensures that you don't end up with potential perverse outcomes. That might be that you've got trucks moving recycled water absurd distances, perhaps, or alternatively, making sure that, say, recycled products don't, in fact, then have a higher embodied carbon if carbon is indeed the focus. So I think it really is just contract specific in terms of types. In the case of, say, D&Cs, my view now is that they need to be as specific and simple as possible, those different mechanisms or strategies, essentially being able to be implemented without a sustainability team. If it's too complex for a standard site engineer to understand, it's probably going to be inefficient. And then if we shift towards where we're heading now with the ITC styles, I think for Suburban Connect, we've got a very effective way of sort of mitigating carbon. So I guess just as a wider context for the audience, so Suburban Connect has a range of KRAs driving specific outcomes. One of those links to carbon and mitigated carbon, as Danielle has set out earlier. And I think that's been set up extremely well based off that early EES carbon modelling. And that includes base case assumptions, all that sort of background work. So it's really clear to all parties how it will be evaluated, and also then what the priorities are across the life cycle. As Danielle also touched on, it's not prescriptive. And so that then means at Suburban Connect, we can engage with the whole supply chain. I think what it drives then is the best value in terms of, in this case, carbon abatement, which is the priority. And it's fair to say that for the first 2 quarters of this year, we effectively didn't look at any initiatives that weren't, going to mitigate up to 10,000 tonnes of carbon. It's just kept everyone's eyes on the prize, so to speak. And that was the focus because we knew then we had this overarching KRA wider reduction. It's working when the procurement team is coming to you to learn more about it, inviting you into all the evaluation meetings as part of that pretty dynamic and sometimes challenging procurement program. So I think overall, client preparation is sort of the key to set up for success in terms of strategies, and then making sure those mechanisms align with the contract style involved.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Zoran, as a commercial and financial lead, you'll have plenty of experience in both the structure and decision-making behind contract setups. So from your experience, what contract levers have worked well or haven't worked well on current or past projects to enable the adoption of emerging sustainability innovations? And in the ideal world, how do you think contracts should be structured to support this even further?
Hi, Danielle. I hope you can hear me. I apologise. My camera on my computer has been playing up, so it's not. I've tried several times, so I apologise to the team. But let's start on that. So in the past, one of the earliest strategies is your tender process. When we go out to market, we tend to tell the supply chain that the assessment criteria is made up of a number of elements, and they each have a weighting. And what I've noticed over the last 10 or 15 years, is that the weighting that was allocated to sustainability, if it was there at all, was very low. Whereas I can tell you on the M80 Ring Road project that sustainability, environment, government policy requirements actually make up 30% of the decision-making allocation for a tender. So we rate sustainability very highly when it comes to procuring a supply chain. So that's one of the traditional levers that you would normally use, and we are using here. But in addition to that, I think the other ones that we've introduced on the M80 Ring Road, which is an Australian first. I'm not sure if people have heard of the Chancery Lane project, but the Chancery Lane project are a bunch of pro bono lawyers globally that develop climate change clauses for construction contracts. And we decided to implement them into our agreements, across all of our agreements on the project. And what they have is a number of clauses, about 7 or 8. There are more, but we looked at those clauses that would be low or neutral cost to implement from a supplier, subcontractor perspective. And we've embedded these in the contract as best endeavours. So these are things like, we want you to come to us with a net zero carbon project variation, where you would introduce something that reduces the carbon impact of the project and has a cost. And then we would consider that cost and then decide whether or not we would issue that variation to the contractor. The other clauses talk about things like using heavy vehicles that have alternative energy supplies, so electric vehicles, electric plant and equipment. They're things that we are seeking from the market, as opposed to using diesel. And we're looking at things like hydrogen use as an alternative, and alternative fuels. So we've made these best endeavours at this point in the hope that the supply chain, but not only that, but the government and the funders of these projects see the value of embedding these climate change clauses, which could have a positive contribution on the climate and the environment and sustainability, and make them mandatory over time. Just like we saw Recycle First, right? 10 years ago, it was a best endeavours. Now it's mandatory. So what we're hoping here by introducing climate change clauses is that this becomes the norm in 5-10 years' time on government infrastructure projects. So that's something we're trying to do to contribute to sustainability. The other initiatives that I think are new and helping to assist with the adoption of emerging sustainable and sustainability innovations is having trials on long-term projects like the North East Link, where you might introduce a new initiative in a low-risk area. And I'll give you an example. We used an ultra-low warm mix bitumen in our car park at Frensham Reserve, where it's rather than 170 degrees at placement time, it's about 117 degrees roughly. So It's more pliable, it's more malleable, it's easier to apply, the heat, the smell is different, and it's safer to use. So what we do is we trial it in areas where there's low risk. It's a car park. You're not going to have a high volume of use, but then you might also use it on local roads or those smaller areas of the project which have got lower use, but might over time provide enough data to then change the industry in terms of products. Yeah, and we may be able to get Vic Roads approvals for things like that. So they're the way we've been able to use trials on the project. The other one is calcine clay. It's an initiative between a couple of the projects within North East Link and the universities, and we've all provided funding to look at calcine clay as an alternative material for the construction industry. So that'll be trialled on this project with the data hopefully providing information to all the interested parties to allow a possible alternative material use in the future. The other initiatives you can use, and I believe this is driven by the clients. If the clients really want to drive change, they would say to you, I will allow for you in your TOC or your budget to have a third of 1% or 1% of the total budget as an incentive pool to incentivize your supply chain to produce sustainable initiatives. So they can come to us with things that might cost a little bit more, but from a sustainability and a carbon footprint point of view, really change the market and really change construction in general. And you have that allocation, so you're not actually taking that out of your margin. You're actually being provided with that upfront, so you've got the incentive to use it with the supply chain. Another fantastic initiative I can talk about in Acciona. Internally, Acciona is very progressive from a sustainability point of view. They have a sustainability management plan that they have every 3 years and renew every 3 years. And part of that, they have internal funding for sustainable initiatives. So if you come up with a great idea that produces a lower carbon footprint for your projects and is a differentiator, they're prepared to fund it from corporate. And I think that's an amazing initiative that they come out with every 6 months, and then they ask for applications. So these are the sorts of things that they're doing to play their part in introducing sustainable outcomes in construction. And just one of the things that we're doing on this project is the sustainability team and the social procurement team meet with the procurement team every month, and we do a procurement look ahead. What we look at is packages that are coming up where there may be a sustainability element that we can target within that tender. So we look at what type of package it is. It's provision of concrete. Okay, well, we're going to now target, a reduction in Portland cement of X%. There's a requirement under the contract, but we're going to then try and negotiate even higher targets with those contractors. And then, as Rob has mentioned earlier, they get embedded in the contracts and they get signed. So these are the sorts of things that I believe were available in the past and things that we can do now to incentivize the adoption of emerging sustainable innovations and also to come up with more sustainable solutions from the supply chain.
Thanks so much, Soren. I loved your comment there earlier about best endeavours and the transition to really seeing things become mandatory and making those things the norm. You've touched on procurement there, so let's transition to a procurement focus. Liam, how do you think how can integrating sustainability into procurement processes ensure that upfront supplier engagement and compliance with material requirements? And can you share a little bit about how the Eastern Burke Tram Alliance is really embedding these requirements into procurement processes?
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, hi everyone. Sorry, yeah, I think you're picking up there. It's about integrating sustainability into the procurement process. And I think the first bit there is the word used, engagement, really engaging early, and that's certainly what we did early on, engaging with the market throughout the RFPI and RFPF and early tender stages to really understand their capability, first of all. And then secondly, throughout our procurement process itself, when we get that properly up and running, it's about having, as Zoran touched on, I think they said they had the 30%, we've got a 40% non-cost evaluation criteria. So we make sure that there's a sustainability percentage represented on all of our packages to make sure that sustainability is integrated in all the packages. The other thing we did here, not just a non-cost criteria, is if you can imagine, we've got over 500 plus packages. It's a lot of volume and work to get through. So we sat with the sustainability team to grade all of our packages as a high, medium, low, and really focus our attention to be a lot more intentional and targeted in our approach to market, to say, well, where do you want to focus our efforts to drive the right sustainable outcomes? That certainly helped us focus the minds on a number of packages. So a good example of that initiative in play really was the construction materials package. So we've termed it construction materials. It's concrete, quarry, and asphalt. And we engaged them very early, a lot of the big suppliers and the medium-sized players. We have quite a substantial volume here, but we met with them to talk about their recycled content capabilities, what they can do, SEM in concrete, wrap in asphalt, what recycled quarry materials could they use. So we engaged them early to understand where they kind of pitch themselves now. And we worked with the sustainability team, therefore, to dial that up a little bit throughout the percentage in the non-cost evaluations, and to set sort of a higher expectation, a higher benchmark for the market. In terms of what that meant and how what we got out of that, we kind of dialed up the targets. So now everyone's committing to a higher percentage. We're certainly meeting the 45% targets and improving on those. And incentivise the suppliers really to come to us with all these other initiatives and ideas they had, and how they could achieve something particularly in a sustainable way, and collaborate with us on BTA. And as part of that, I suppose, what are we learning as part of the wider industry? Certainly that for a lot of those big commodities, it is business as usual to have a percentage, a 45%, etc. And there's opportunity in certain ones to dial up that expectation. And the other part of it that's probably come out of that early engagement with them is one thing we're doing slightly differently here, is we're embedding those people into our team. So we're actually bringing the market into our project team to work with us to drive the right behaviours, and certainly the right behaviours around selection of products, selection of mixes, and making sure we are actually, as a project team, using the best mixes, the best products, and putting that agreement to work. So that's probably the best example of it, I think.
Thanks so much, Liam. We've heard, I think, a lot now around kind of collaboration with the supply chain. What I'm keen to touch on as well is where contracts are set up to be much more collaborative, and how contract arrangements can also foster that collaboration. So, Sam, how do you think contract models, in your experience, foster collaboration and support successful sustainability outcomes?
Yeah, thanks, Danielle. I really think this is an important aspect, because I do believe that contracts set up and play a critical role in driving collaboration, and collaboration plays a critical role in delivering sustainability. So, and that's because contract types really define the level of stakeholder engagement, risk, and incentives that's at play. So let's just take, for example, a non-collaborative contract type, such as a fixed lump sum design and construct type contract. Really high level of risk on one stakeholder, the contractor there. And then let's just go in contrast. Let's go to a collaborative contract, say an alliance contract. Multiple stakeholders at play: operators, clients, contractors, designers, architects, sometimes even subcontractors are part of the alliance. And it's shared risk and reward. And the term value for an alliance or a collaborative contract is much more broader. And from my own experience working in these type of contracts and others, a contract type that carries higher level of financial risk with less stakeholders means it discourages collaborations, and also sustainability is focused less on compared to other matters. And that's because the core problem or issue here is that what gets valued is what gets focused on. And high risk contracts, such as a fixed lump sum D&C, the utmost focus is on cost control and any exposure to cost overruns, program quality. And it makes complete sense. Like if I was a business or I was a project involved in a D&C, just knowing the industry that we're in with such tight margins, and also the fact that we have one of the highest rates of liquidation in our industry compared to another industry, it makes complete sense to have a huge amount of focus on costs and any exposure to cost overruns. Sustainability can be delivered. I'm not saying it can't be delivered in those type of contracts, but it's much harder to influence. And that's because ultimately it's overshadowed by the focus on cost and time, budget, and program. In a collaborative contract type, however, the focus is on a much broader range of objectives, financial criteria, traditional objectives, but also non-traditional objectives. And that's because we've got objectives at play that's to meet a broader range of stakeholder needs. And so this is where we see sustainability considered to be a really high focus area alongside those traditional metrics such as time, budget, and program. These experiences also do correlate with some findings from a research project that I completed with industry peers back in 2020. Basically, what we did is we reviewed a big range of projects with different contract types, also different contract sizes, and we really wanted to understand what was the critical success factors for driving or delivering successful sustainability outcomes. And we focused on scores related to the IS rating. And what we found was that projects that had high rates of collaboration with a broader range of stakeholders tended to have far better sustainability results and scores with the IS rating. So it really does drive home the message that collaboration or contract types that increase collaboration do drive sustainability results. And I suppose the question is, why is that? And I think when you look at collaborative contract types, it provides a far greater opportunity for earlier contractor designer involvement. So those type of procurement models are at play. We also see the risk and reward mechanisms for sustainability more commonly involved in those type of contracts. There's also more time for problem solving. So we're bringing much more stakeholders into the development process earlier on to challenge the brief, to challenge the original solution and ultimately come up with a better one. And it also provides more flexibility and time for appropriate budget allocation to a range of different aspects, including sustainability. So ultimately, this gives a greater opportunity to deliver sustainability outcomes. And I would say that I'm not saying that non-traditional contracts such as D&Cs don't have a place in the market. They absolutely serve a purpose. But what I'm saying is that we need to emphasize on where they are currently placed. And if we do have them in place, we fundamentally need to integrate sustainability into those contracts so that they're not a bolt-on feature and they're not an afterthought. Because what we do find is that collaboration is driven by the contract type, and collaboration really does set up the success for sustainability. So that's my thoughts. Back to you. Yeah.
Sam, we probably have time for one more question to be squeezed in before we get wrapped up. And look, Sam, you've spoken to where there's a really strong focus on cost at times as well. And Zoran, you spoke earlier about how we really work to also incentivize the supply chain. So I'd like to look at kind of this broader issue of addressing cost concerns, which we hear over and over. And I'll welcome, I think, either Liam or Zoran to jump in on this one. Often the argument against sustainability is that the solutions are more costly. So could you give me an example of where you've collaborated with the supply chain and really used those contract mechanisms to achieve sustainable outcomes?
Sure, happy to jump in there. I believe by having early discussions with the supply chain, we did so during the top development phase while we were preparing our estimate, but also engaging with the market to advise of the requirements to work on the M80 Ring Road project. And what we did was we talked about sustainability being a differentiator. Right, so we said we would like you to deliver your materials to site without single-use plastics. Find an alternative that is cost neutral or slightly above, but highlight the fact that your solution is more sustainable. So what that means is you don't necessarily buy lowest value. That's not lowest cost. You don't necessarily engage the contractor or supplier with the lowest cost. what you're looking for is value for money. And because sustainability is such a large element of the assessment criteria, then that carries weight. So it might cost a little more. And it's not necessarily exponentially more expensive. It's just marginally more expensive, but the solution is more sustainable. So what we say to the supply chain is, this is your opportunity to differentiate yourself from the market. If you really want to be different and progressive and be more sustainable, this is your opportunity. So that's what we've done by engaging with and talking to the market early about how important sustainability is to us. And in some instances, we're prepared to pay for it.
To hear more about our work and what we've achieved to date, you can again click on the QR code on your screen and you'll be able to read through our annual sustainability report from 2023. Thanks so much.
I might jump in just noting time, and apologies. I think we probably could have talked about this and tapped into all of the knowledge in the panel for a lot longer. These things always happen. But yeah, I'd just like to a big shout out and thank you, Danielle, for facilitating, and Rob for presenting, and to all of our panelists today, Sam, Zoran, Liam, Andrew. Yeah, really fantastic to hear your insights. So thank you very much. Just to let everyone know before we close up, we've got a couple more sessions on today. So there's a really exciting session over lunch around modular design. We've got Scott Taylor, our Director of Engineering from Major Roads Projects, with the CEO of Victorian Health and Building. We've got the Engineering Director from CPB as well. So yeah, some really great insights there. And then this afternoon, we've got the Technology for Material Tracking, where we've got some insights from the real estate sector, which I think will be really relevant as well. So yeah, big thank you to everyone. Please tune in for the rest of the sessions this week. And thanks again to the presenters and panelists. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.